بين Donc effectivement, que la crise du Covid, la situation de la pandémie, a eu des conséquences très négatives sur les économies de nos pays, mais pas seulement sur les économies, aussi sur la situation sociale. Il y a des groupes qui en ont souffert particulièrement et qui sont restés derrière. Il y a des groupes qui se recoupent parfois, donc il y a des jeunes, et c'est pourquoi dans cette première partie de cette séance, on va parler d'eux. C'est les femmes aussi, et c'est pourquoi dans la deuxième partie de cette session, on va en parler aussi. Et c'est en général tous les travailleurs de l'économie informelle, où ces groupes sont malheureusement surreprésentés. Donc il est important effectivement qu'on puisse voir, analyser, examiner des solutions politiques à ces problèmes. Et de ce point de vue, nous serons très heureux d'écouter nos panélistes qui viennent d'horizons différents pour pouvoir échanger avec eux les recettes qu'ils sont en train de mettre en œuvre lorsqu'ils ont des responsabilités ministérielles ou de défendre et de préconiser lorsqu'ils sont des organisations internationales ou des représentants des partenaires sociaux. Donc, je vais passer la parole à Monsieur le ministre Sékouli et je vais lui poser une question, si vous me permettez, pour cadrer un peu votre intervention. Donc, Monsieur le ministre, quel type de mesures préventives peuvent être adoptées pour garantir que personne ne soit laissé pour compte? Et quels sont les principaux ingrédients politiques pour reconstruire au mieux? La parole est à vous, Monsieur le ministre.
Merci beaucoup et merci à toutes celles et tous ceux qui nous honorent aujourd'hui par leur présence et par cet intérêt aussi pour écouter aussi le contenu. Je pense que le premier sujet auquel on doit s'adresser et qui vient en réponse un peu à votre question, c'est la nature des sociétés auxquelles nous appartenons. Ce sont des sociétés qui ont connu des mutations au fur et à mesure. Vous avez parlé d'aspects démographiques qui sont incontournables et qui se présentent de façon très différente selon les pays. Vous avez des aspects sociaux, des réalités sociales, des réalités économiques également, comme le poids de l'informel, comme le travail décent, comme la topologie et l'habitude et la tradition du travail de la femme en relation avec des prolongements sociétaux. Vous avez également la question des jeunes qui se pose avec beaucoup d'acuité, sans oublier le couplage de tout cela à la dimension territoriale qui reste aujourd'hui un facteur très important qu'il va falloir surveiller de très près, car l'un des problèmes qui peuvent être générés également, c'est l'accès des gens qui sont de la population qui est dans des territoires qui ne sont pas toujours, je dirais, proches des investissements créateurs d'emplois. Alors, à tout cela s'ajoute la nature du mindset général et l'aspect générationnel. De quelle génération on parle? Parce que vous parlez de mesures préventives, et donc, est-ce qu'on parle de la génération X qui a des aspirations particulières, qui voudrait équilibrer entre la vie privée et le professionnel? Est-ce qu'on parle des YZ qui ont une autre approche? Est-ce qu'on parle des générations d'avant et on parle des seniors qui ont surtout perdu leurs emplois et qui ont déjà des charges, qui ont déjà des engagements très très importants? Je pense que sur un plan purement conceptuel, nous avons une conflictualité entre deux sujets, entre une société de l'ordre, c'est-à-dire les institutions dont on dispose partout dans nos pays respectifs correspondent un peu plus à ce qu'on appelle la société de l'ordre, c'est-à-dire il y a des règles, il y a des voies, il y a des critères, il y a des façons de faire, il y a des délais, et il y a un temps pour produire une réforme, un temps pour produire un programme, un temps pour le déployer, un temps pour qu'il soit accessible. Il y a une file d'attente qui se crée, ou des files d'attente qui se créent par la force des choses. Mais à côté, nous avons des populations qui sont surtout des populations de la société de l'égalitarisme, c'est-à-dire des jeunes qui ne veulent pas attendre, qui ne veulent pas se soumettre à la société de l'ordre, qui ne veulent pas se soumettre aux règles que la logique peut imposer, mais que la façon de faire et de décider peut imposer aussi. Donc le dilemme pour un gouvernement quel qu'il soit, c'est d'être en phase avec les attentes de la population, de délivrer rapidement, mais d'être aussi proche de cette société égalitariste qui a vu le jour dans toutes nos sociétés de la Méditerranée, j'ai envie de dire sans exception. J'ai envie de dire sans exception. Concrètement, de quoi il s'agit? Il s'agit d'abord de faire des mesures d'urgence pour pouvoir apporter des solutions d'urgence pour des populations qui en ont besoin. Pour le cas du Maroc, par exemple, je vous en ai parlé tout à l'heure, nous avons prévu une panoplie de programmes de nature différente et naturellement c'est un effort budgétaire et donc l'arbitrage politique est important pour pouvoir affecter des ressources en temps de crise où nous importons de l'inflation du monde entier. Et donc cela, je pense que sur les 6 mois de ce gouvernement, nous l'avons plus ou moins bien entamé. Un programme pour employer 250 000 jeunes qui a l'air de fonctionner, un programme pour aider à l'entrepreneuriat. C'est du préventif aussi parce que ce sont des gens que vous mettez on track pour pouvoir accepter l'idée de l'employabilité, accepter cette idée de travailler, d'être formé et d'avancer. Accepter l'idée de se réveiller le matin, d'aller dans un chantier ou de réfléchir à sa petite entreprise et de démarrer, même si les conditions ne sont pas toujours optimales. Je pense que ça, c'est un élément important, c'est un signal qui est donné par le gouvernement, par les collectivités territoriales, par la structure de l'État, sur les différentes strates, à la population, parce que l'emploi, c'est une question de peuple. Ce n'est pas une question d'élite, ce n'est pas une question d'institution, c'est une question de vie, de société et de peuple. Alors, après, effectivement, nous avons pensé à une approche sectorielle. Alors, cette fois, comment est-ce qu'on peut cibler des secteurs, leur donner les moyens de subsistance, mais également de confiance dans l'avenir? Parce que, en définitive, et au-delà des mesures matérielles, et au-delà de cette présence-là, il faut alimenter aussi cette espérance collective chez de larges franges de la population, comme quoi, en attendant une reprise en bonne et due forme à l'échelle planétaire, votre pays, votre gouvernement, les forces vives de votre nation vous aident à vous préparer. Et pour ne pas trop prendre la parole, je finirai par dire que nous avons, et j'en parlais avec son Excellence, Monsieur le Commissaire, qui est très sensible à la question, pour ne pas dire qu'il est l'un des grands défenseurs. Cette question d'économie sociale est aujourd'hui, elle apparaît comme l'une des pistes vraiment qui apporte des solutions équilibrées. Le secteur a prouvé sa résilience pendant la Covid-19. Maintenant, il faut de l'innovation sociale, il faut des business models importants et il faut un sursaut collectif avec les acteurs pour préparer l'avenir. Car le pire qui pourrait arriver, vraiment le pire qui pourrait arriver, un pays, c'est pendant des périodes difficiles de crise, de manque de moyens, de ne pas envisager les réformes, d'être sur des visions court-termistes qui vont consommer du budget, qui ne vont pas régler le problème et qui ne prépareront pas des sorties de crise. L'exemple que je vous ai cité ce matin, et je finis par ça, du dialogue social est un bel exemple, pour nous en tout cas au Maroc, et je suis sûr que les différents pays ont beaucoup d'exemples à nous donner là-dessus aussi, c'est-à-dire nous nous sommes mis d'accord avec les syndicats, avec les patronats, ils sont là d'ailleurs, qu'il est nécessaire que l'on trace une voie de façon collective. Alors, il y a le poids de l'idéologie, il y a le poids des représentations, il y a la peur du changement, parce que quand vous envisagez des réformes, parmi les réformes qu'on a envisagées dans ce pacte social, il y a des réformes qui vont redistribuer les rôles, redistribuer les moyens. Ce n'est pas toujours facile à accepter. Mais je pense qu'on a assisté à une belle entente, à un sursaut patriotique, et nous avons réussi quelque chose de très rare, qui est d'introduire un peu de rationalité dans un processus politique. Et je pense que c'est un effort qu'on devrait faire tous et en permanence pour le bien de tous. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Ministre. Merci de nous avoir fait part de réformes que vous avez entreprises dans votre pays. Mais au-delà de ça, je voulais vous remercier parce que je pense que vous avez très bien défini le dilemme de tout gouvernant, qui est l'équilibre entre le temps des attentes, le temps de l'espoir et le temps de l'ordre, comme vous l'avez appelé. Donc je pense que ça, pour tous les ministres qui sont là, ils vont s'y reconnaître. Donc je passe, I will give now the floor to Mrs. Gemma del Rey, and I will introduce her speech with a question. What should be the political priorities for this recovery post-COVID-19? Mrs. Gemma del Rey, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Jordi, and many thanks to the Union for the Mediterranean for inviting me to be here today in this session, and many thanks to the Kingdom of Morocco for hosting this policy conference. Firstly, I would like to pass on to all those attending this policy conference the warmest regards of Yolanda Díaz, our second Vice President of the Government and Ministerial of Labour and Social Economy in Spain. She very much wanted to be here, but complications with her agenda made it impossible. And getting back to your question, Jordi, the countries comprising the Union for the Mediterranean, like all the other countries in the world, have been confronted with the effects of the social effects of the COVID-19 pandemic since early 2020. In one way or another, all the countries have responded to this unprecedented situation in a similar fashion. Unlike the management of the financial crisis in 2008, the main objective in the management of the COVID-19 pandemic was to ensure, to maintain the business structure and to protect workers and family, and above all, to let no one behind. Indeed, this was the case in Spain. The government, with the agreement of its social partners, rolled out a huge package of measures to create an extensive social shield. Thanks to our scheme of reducing working hours, we have recovered all the jobs lost during the early months of the pandemic. In fact, more than 20 million people are currently employed in Spain, meaning a rise of 770 jobs compared with the beginning of the pandemic. And just as the recovery from the pandemic was beginning to gain momentum, we are personally facing another new situation with adverse economic impact. Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which Spain condemns like the rest of the European Union, has led to a stark increase in energy prices, to the disruption of global supply chain management, and increased inflation, a rising inflation in most countries worldwide. And equally as with the pandemic, our duty as policymakers is to implement public policies to ensure that this situation has no impact, or at least a little impact as possible in the economy and unemployment. So therefore, the question, so what can we do about it? And undoubtedly, the lessons learned during the COVID-19 pandemic will help us to respond to this issue. We can summarize the response in two policy priorities, the social dialogue and decent work. We believe social dialogue should be our method for policy making, and decent work should be our goal. In Spain, we believe that now and always social dialogue, the ongoing dialogue between the government, the employees' organizations and trade unions, is the most effective formula for designing the best economic, labor and social policies. Reforms agreed upon the social dialogue are the most effective, but especially they are the most long-lasting. In Spain, in the past 2 years, the government and its social partners have signed 14 labor agreements. These agreements range from the protective measures implemented during the COVID-19 pandemics to new legislation regarding telework or working in digital platforms. The latest and most important agreement we have signed is a wage range reform or labor legislation to combat precarious work. And as I mentioned before, our goal should be decent work focused on right-based employment. And for us, decent work includes many aspects. Decent work includes fair wages and adequate minimum wages. In Spain, in the past 4 years, the governments have increased the minimum wages by 36%. And this has had no negative impact in the unemployment, and quite the contrary. Decent work includes real and effective equality between women and men at the workplace. And to this end, we have increased the number of companies that have to prepare and implement an equality plan. And we have adopted measures to reduce the gender pay gap by increasing pay transparency. Decent work includes preventing new ways of employment leading to precarious working conditions. Thus, through a process of social dialogue, we have been able to regulate telework and its adoption on a voluntary basis. We have also reclassified the legal classification of workers that work in digital platforms that used to be false autonomous, and moreover, we have safeguarded algorithmic transparency to guarantee equality and non-discrimination. Decent work means greater job stability and a larger number of open-ended contracts. The labour reform I have mentioned before, the one agreed between the government and the social partner, seeks to reduce the number of temporary contracts and increment the number of open-ended contracts. And it has already proven effective in Spain. Before the labour reform, 1 out of every 10 contracts signed each month was open-ended. In April, after the reform, 700,000 open-ended contracts have been signed, namely 50% of all the contracts signed were open-ended. Decent work ultimately means security. Decent work also means an inclusive labour market for women and young people. Our government has launched new active employment measures based on personalized guidance, training and reskilling, adapted to the new skills required by green and digital transitions. Moreover, measures such like the ones I mentioned before, increasing the minimum wage or providing a greater job stability, particularly benefits those who suffer the most from precarious work, namely young people and women. And I must also mention measures favoring equality and diversity in the labour market. Specific actions have been aimed at LGBTI people and also to people with disability in order to favour their inclusion in the job market and also to ensure non-discrimination. We believe that this is how we can build back better. This is the path towards a just recovery and an inclusive growth. The social dialogue and decent work must also be hallmarks in the Euro-Mediterranean region, and Spain will continue working towards these goals in the Union for the Mediterranean and with its member countries. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Gemma. Thank you very much, Mrs. Undersecretary. I think that it was particularly interesting hearing from you about the importance that you give to social dialogue with a very concrete example of a very far-reaching and wide-encompassing agreement that you have managed to get in Spain, and how its first results seem to be very encouraging. So again, as you said, this should be one of the pieces of the DNA of the policy that we do in the pourtour of the Mediterranean. I will now give the floor to Mr. Knudsen, who is the Deputy Secretary General of OECD. I would like to underline that it's the first time that OECD participates in our meetings, and we very much welcome that. And as for the other speakers, I will frame the intervention with a question. We have heard from the previous panelists what could be the key policy ingredients of building back better. According to you, what must change? Mr. Deputy Secretary.
Thank you so much. And before I turn to that difficult question and a not easy answer, let me perhaps start by pointing to the even more difficult global economic and geopolitical circumstances surrounding that issue. I mean, we're already well into the third year of a COVID-19 crisis. It may be retreating in many places of the world, but we're still living with the consequences of 2.5 years of crisis. And then, of course, on top of that came on the 24th of February this year, the totally unprovoked, unjustifiable, and illegal Russian war of aggression against Ukraine. These multiple crises have then added to the complexities of the international economic system, adding to the food crisis that is being felt very much on this part of the Mediterranean, adding to supply chain problems and increasing inflationary pressures all around the world. So this was a recovery that was bound to be uneven already, and now the recovery is even more put at risk. When I say the recovery is uneven, it's because that actually in the OECD area we had 11 consecutive months of lower and lower and lower unemployment. That was actually pretty good. There were some encouraging signs in the Mediterranean region as well, but from a totally different level. Actually, the COVID-19 pandemic exacerbated the unemployment, leading to a 10.5% unemployment rate in 2020 compared to 9.5% in 2019. So it is an uneven recovery from uneven levels. To address your questions in perhaps a little bit more concrete detail, I would say that there are three key messages on how to build back better when we talk about employment and labor market policies. The first one is very much around inclusivity, and you, Minister, yourself mentioned it in your opening remarks. It's sort of been already a thread running through this morning's discussion. But the impact of COVID-19 was not equal across groups. And I'd like to highlight especially women and youth as two vulnerable groups that we have to pay special attention to. They are still lagging behind. Youth employment is still below pre-crisis levels in half of the OECD countries. But if we then turn to the MENA region, we see youth unemployment reaching 27% in 2020 and up to 47% for young women. That is a real challenge, and I was very happy to hear the opening panel total agreement on ambitious targets to combat this challenge. Women have been particularly affected by the pandemic. We see how women have borne an unproportional share of unpaid care work. It's leading them to reduce their hours in the labor market. It actually risks at one point even forcing them out of the labor market. So I couldn't agree more with the minister when he said this morning, or he stated the ambitious targets of increasing the activity rates of women. These are vulnerabilities that we have to address collectively. The second key message is that we also have to welcome and embrace structural change. We must respond to the digital transformation, we must respond to the green transformation, and we must, I don't want to say learn to live with it, because I think actually it's a blessing in disguise. Look, how would we have coped with the COVID-19 pandemic, say 30 years ago in 1992? We would have had to either shut down the labor markets and our economies completely, or live with death rates that would have been so much more dramatic than what we've seen today. The digital transformation has really accelerated even more during these last 2.5 years. We should welcome that. That doesn't mean it doesn't pose real challenges to the labor market. Of course it does, because there are vulnerable people who are not perhaps taking part automatically of this digitally inspired boost to the economy that is perhaps or hopefully ahead of us. So we need to make sure that through upskilling and reskilling that everyone is ready to take part in this digital transformation. I'm thinking back of how we responded to the financial crisis in 2008 and 2009, where we were perhaps not mindful enough of the equalities that could arise from turning on the globalization engine. We were right to turn on the globalization engine, but we weren't paying enough attention to the equal distribution of the benefits. Now, as globalization is in danger because of the geopolitical circumstances, the other big engine that we can turn to when we recover from this crisis is the digital transformation. So now we have to pay attention to the possible looming digital divide. It's not only about access, it's also about tools, it's about skills. I think that'll be incredibly important as we look at labor market policies. The other one, of course, is the green transition. Also here, if we are to, realize a zero by 2050 scenarios, net zero emissions by 2050 scenarios, IEA has estimated that we can globally create 9 million jobs. But we'll also lose 5 million jobs globally in the fossil fuel intensive sector. So again here, we have to make sure that labor markets are able to cater for that transition, that necessary transition of our economies. Last key message is perhaps even more focused on labor ministries. I think there are 3 things that labor ministries should focus on as they look to the immediate future. First priority must be to connect people with jobs. It sounds simple, but I think everyone who's worked with the labor markets knows that it's not that simple. Secondly, we need effective skills policy. We've said it so many times: reskilling, upskilling, lifelong learning, but it really is the name of the game. And then the third priority is to address long-standing gaps in social protection. Again, during the crisis, many countries put in place emergency support for the self-employed. These measures should now be reassessed and transformed into more targeted and more systemic responses to ensure fairness and incentives of work. Lastly, I'll do a little bit of advertising for the brilliant cooperation we at the OECD have, not only with the EU but with the Union for Mediterranean. We did a report together called Regional Integration in the Union for the Mediterranean last year, and there were 3 main findings of that report: that governments really have a central role to play in 3 fields. One is promoting a shared vision of mobility. The second one is investing in skills development and transferability. And the third one is reviewing the design of circular migration schemes. Those are all important, and it leads me to the end of my intervention here, and I'll end with the geopolitics as well. I think this meeting is perhaps more timely than ever. It is extremely important that, as many Western countries are now focused on the Ukraine crisis, that we do not lose sight of each other across the Mediterranean, that we in the West continue to commit to this region and commit to Africa. But I also dare saying that we also need the moral clarity of support from African and Mediterranean countries in what we consider to be perhaps the essential crisis of our time, when democracy and freedom is at risk in our part of the world. So I think it is essential that we increase our dialogue, that we increase our cooperation, that we increase our common understanding of this interconnected world. I think, as it's been said quite clearly from many this morning, we are interconnected, and you can't separate migration from labor markets, from economics, from geopolitics. So with that, again, thank you so much for the invitation, and we have big challenges in front of us. I hope we can solve some of them together.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Knudsen. As always, interventions from OECD are very insightful because you have a great analytical capacity. I think that it was very important what you referred, that is to say that the crisis has had what you can say asymmetric impacts in different groups of population. So we do need to look in particular, as we are doing now, to the situation of young people and of women. I think it's important what you said before as well about the different way in which all countries have reacted to this crisis as compared to the previous crisis. And I think that this is something that we have to underline and that we have to continue continue in this path. We have to make sure that we take into account the inequality dimension of the crisis in this strategy of building back better. And I think that it's very important that organizations like yours say it. And then, of course, about the interconnection, how to disagree with that. Indeed, we need to keep working and talking to each other and working together. So thank you very much. I will now give the floor to Mrs. Barbara Beltrame Giacomello, President of BusinessMed, and I will, of course, like for the other for the other speakers, frame her intervention with a question, which is, what are your views as social partners on inclusive solutions for economic and social delivery? Mrs. Matramello.
Yes, thank you very much. First of all, I would like to say thank you to our Moroccan host for having invited us here, and also to UFM for welcoming us in Marrakesh. As a social partners from both sides of the Mediterranean, we are grateful for the invitation to share a view with the decision makers of how to improve employment and employability, especially in the most vulnerable groups. On both sides of the Mediterranean, we have several challenges ahead of us. Some of these challenges were very raised at the Ministerial Conference back in 2019, and they have been worsened by the sanitary crisis and the policy needed should be adapted and adjusted. When it comes to discussing inclusive solutions for economic and social recovery, we all have to adapt this mindset. At the local level, inclusiveness, for example, advocating for women issues and youth employment, cannot be achieved if policymaker process do not share the same inclusive philosophy. In this context, I'd like to acknowledge the effort made so far by the UFM and the European Commission in including social partners from both sides, an inclusive partner. Such effort encourage everyone to continue on this path and build common initiatives for implementing new policies and solutions. Social inclusion must create a policy measure for the most vulnerable groups. The aim is giving financial autonomy and professional accomplishment for everyone. To do so, we need to address skill gaps to make sure workers can adapt to quick changing environments. This support can be delivered to effective vocational educational and training and career mentoring, as well as the social services. In this process, investment in education and training system for every working group is the key. Therefore, we propose to go further in developing and reinforcing partnership between policymakers, private sector, and academic bodies. An intervention at the very early stage of the educational process could certainly help in defining needs of both shores of the Mediterranean, detecting future trends and adapt educational progress accordingly in order to reduce labor market mismatch. This step is also essential for us when it comes to seeking solutions to economic migration channels that benefit to everyone in order to better integrate the productive process at all levels. At the other note, inclusiveness sometimes requires proactive measures. For instance, improving the perception of the contribution of women to develop and social advance of society would be crucial. So the value of women employment should be promoted as an essential precondition for change. Also, inclusiveness calls for concrete impulse for youth and women entrepreneurship, and this is particularly relevant in the southern countries, where the challenges is amplified by the weight of the informal sector, the precarious nature of job availability to the most vulnerable groups, every higher level of youth entrepreneur, even more than 20%, and less advanced infrastructure in place to overcome these factors. Moreover, addressing formally for vulnerable groups can be an effective way to guarantee a target social protection for everyone. because newly integrated workers will be able to contribute to social security and retirement fund. For example, half of the population of North Africa countries is under 24, and therefore represent a huge potential for inclusive development. At the same time, digital transition. Also in response of COVID has made the remote work a widespread phenomenon. And the acceleration in the adoption of digital technology open new opportunities which can benefit socially exposed people. Social partners are crucial in this process. They understand the impact of transition and they can contribute to design effective solutions. Let me say that clearly. As a representative, as private sector, at the regional level, we believe that economy relationships are above all and closely related with the culture and social progress. In this perspective, obviously, social inclusion needs also a more inclusive decision-making process. Devoting time and commitment to dialogue is the key to achieving recovery in the most inclusive way, and look altogether for solutions for a noble cause, the cause of sustainable and responsible development. In this context, the Solid project for promotion of social dialogue in the Southern Mediterranean neighborhoods mark a milestone for the consortium of social partners and civil society organizations. Indeed, the continuity of a longer-term commitment to dialogue by each one of us is not only objective, but also a way to mutualize effort in looking for optimal solutions for critical issues. The Solid project initially covered Morocco, Tunisia, Jordan, and pilot countries, and currently widening the Algeria, Palestine, and Lebanon. The result is the adoption of a 12-point document formulating the priorities emerged as a necessary field of action for social partners in Southern Mediterranean countries. The document encompasses challenging areas for developing the region, including social and tax justice, environmental issues, gender-based challenges, and labor conditions of the most fragile group. As far as the document for social dialogue, our objective to ensure that it finds the proper translation on the ground and the sphere of political decision-making. We know that the dialogue needs to be institutionalized and that we should ensure representative monitoring and mutual accountability at all levels of decision-making processes. We would like to create a community of practice with a common level of understanding of social dialogue across the 6 countries that will serve a platform for future initiative between the Southern Mediterranean social partners and other relevant stakeholders, such as government, local authorities, economic, and so on. To conclude, the achievement of prosperous, resilient, and inclusive society is a common goal that we are all committed to reach. We at BusinessMed are pushing forward that goal. In this regard, we can mention the INVEST project, which empower innovative startups on environmental transition, and the Med for Waste project to develop a circular economy around waste management in close collaboration with local authorities in the region. The dual challenge of the digital transition and environmental action can be faced with a diffuse yet coordinated approach. We call for establishment and development of sustainable region value chains that would improve the integration of both sides of the Mediterranean. So thank you very much, and I come in my place.
Thank you very much. Again, it was very useful to hear what social partners, in this case BusinessMed, had to say about that, and the importance, of course, but not just the importance, but your commitment in order to work together with the other side of industry, I would say, and with governments in order to find the right solutions for this building back better. And indeed, I think it was very interesting for all of us to hear about specific projects like the SOLID one, which I think is a very, very valuable initiative that will no doubt be expanded to other countries. So now we are slightly behind schedule, but nevertheless, I think that we can devote some minutes to some potential questions from the room. So if anybody in the room wants to take the floor in order to ask questions to our panelists, please feel free. If you can introduce yourself, of course, thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Pierre-Vincent Signy, Organisation internationale des employeurs. Merci et bravo à tous les panélistes pour leurs interventions brillantes. Moi, j'avais une petite question en réagissant à un terme que j'ai entendu en introduction de cette session, qui est le terme d'entreprise sociale, qui a été proposé par Madame Tachetti, et ensuite repris d'ailleurs par le ministre Sekouri. Et cette réflexion sur ce qu'on appelle aussi l'économie sociale et solidaire, qui sera adressé par la Conférence internationale du travail de l'OIT en juin prochain. La question c'est comment vous situez cette économie-là au sein ou à côté de l'économie traditionnelle, pour la qualifier ainsi. Comment vous arrivez à adresser effectivement pour l'objectif de cette cette reprise inclusive, les inégalités, bien sûr, intégrer ces populations dites vulnérables, mais aussi favoriser une croissance économique. Donc en réalité, le curseur dont Monsieur le Ministre parlait entre les attentes et aussi, je dirais, les résultats, le curseur il doit être aussi placé entre comment on soutient cette économie sociale et solidaire et comment on soutient aussi la croissance et l'emploi. Parce que il ne peut pas y avoir de travail décent s'il n'y a pas de croissance économique. Donc voilà, c'est ma question, elle est un peu longue, excusez-moi, mais elle me paraissait importante.
Merci, je pense, Monsieur le Ministre, que la question est plutôt pour vous.
Je céderai ma place volontiers à Monsieur le Commissaire pour répondre à cette question. Vous voulez dire un mot? Sérieusement, est-ce qu'on peut donner le micro à Monsieur le Commissaire? Ça ne vous dérange pas Parce que c'est un thème qui lui est tellement cher que... Monsieur le Commissaire, peut-être moi. Désolé de...
Bon, merci beaucoup pour la question. Je crois que effectivement, nous avons eu plusieurs échanges avec les ministres sur ce thème de l'économie sociale. Et je crois que nous avons surtout eu un exemple fantastique de réussite qui combine une démarche économique, entrepreneuriale, qui est jeune, puisque cette dame était très jeune, qui en plus vise les populations les moins favorisées et inclut aussi une dimension écologique. Donc je crois qu'il y a là une synthèse fantastique de ce que l'économie sociale est capable de faire. Alors maintenant, la Commission a lancé un plan d'action sur l'économie sociale et bien sûr ce plan d'action vise l'économie sociale au sein de l'Union et je constate d'ailleurs que beaucoup d'États membres maintenant développent un intérêt évident pour ce type d'économie qui n'est pas opposé à l'autre économie, qui peut être complémentaire, qui a des objectifs parfois similaires, parfois aussi différents, qui a surtout un objectif d'impact, impact social, impact environnemental. Et je crois qu'il y a beaucoup de liens avec nos amis de l'autre côté de la rive de la Méditerranée pour développer des conceptions, des concepts en matière d'économie sociale. Donc je crois que parce qu'on est en crise, parce qu'on est dans une transition écologique mais aussi numérique, parce qu'il faut peut-être réinventer un peu la globalisation. Je crois qu'il y a cet aspect que le local, le territorial revient en force, qu'il y a qu'il y a un besoin pour de nouveaux modèles. Et là, l'économie sociale, l'entrepreneuriat social, parce que j'insiste beaucoup là-dessus, il y a un besoin d'entrepreneurs. Et là, je crois que le ministre jordanien est tout à fait d'accord. Il faut soutenir cet entrepreneuriat-là. Et encore une fois, on a eu un magnifique exemple, offre des perspectives fortes pour redresser, pour réorienter un peu le fonctionnement de nos économies, pour promouvoir un développement plus inclusif d'un côté, plus soutenable, puisque malgré tout, nous avons le défi énorme qui est celui du changement climatique, mais le défi social est également énorme. Et il faut ramener les deux ensemble et trouver des solutions originales, et je crois que l'économie sociale peut y arriver. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Commissaire, pour votre réponse. Je pense qu'on pourrait prendre encore une question, s'il y en a. Sinon, on va clôturer ce panel et passer au point suivant. Je pense que vous avez convaincu tout le monde, Monsieur le Commissaire. Donc, on va clôturer cette séance ici et on passe au point suivant. Merci beaucoup à tous les panélistes et pour leur intervention.
Muchas gracias. Thank you very much, Mr. Curate. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you. And I would like to invite to join me to the stage for our next point, Mr. Xavier Mateu, Director of the Interim of the European Training Foundation, to present the cross-country report on the monitoring exercise. It started last year. They participated in 11 member states of the Union for the Mediterranean, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Well, it's always a challenge to be the last one before the lunch, so I will try to go straight forward and present this example of monitoring of the Cascades initiative. Dear ministers, dear honorable guests and colleagues, let me start by thanking the co-presidency of the Union for the Mediterranean, Jordan and the European Union, as well the Union for the Mediterranean Secretariat for inviting ETF for this important event, and for the excellent and fruitful cooperation throughout the whole design, development and implementation of the monitoring of the priorities of the Cascades Ministerial Declaration on Employment and Labour back in 2019. My sincere thanks go to the Union for Mediterranean member states that volunteered to be part of this pilot monitoring exercise, and because without their input and efforts deployed, as well as their continued review and feedback, we would not have been achieved the important results that we will present now. The European Training Foundation, the ETF, has an in-depth and long-lasting experience in monitoring and assessing skills and employment policies in what we call the ETF partner countries, especially through the Torino process. And now we are in the process of launching a new wave of the Torino process following a thorough revision to better capture technological and not technological transformation, as well as embracing lifelong learning perspective, as it was mentioned today. I would like to underline that this reporting that I am presenting now does not aim at analyzing the policy progress of development trends, neither to assess the country's performance, but it's meant as a monitoring exercise, observing and reporting the situation of the selected domains of the Ministerial Declaration priorities of Cascades, based on the information that is provided by the voluntary Union for the Mediterranean member states who have participated. Let me briefly remind the U4N Ministerial Declaration objectives for this monitoring exercise. First of all, the monitoring framework had the primary objective to track progress on priorities identified and agreed by the ministers in the Cascades in 2019. Furthermore, ministers underlined the importance to foster a culture of monitoring and evidence-based policy making for better policy design, policy implementation, and policy review. And last but not least, participation in the monitoring process had the objective to foster cooperation and collaboration among the Union for Mediterranean member states, which is one of the main objectives of the organization. The scope of the monitoring covered the 4 priorities of the Ministerial Declaration, namely job creation, social dialogue and civil society participation, better integration into the labor market, and the last one, which is the importance of skills development in a changing world of work. The process leading to the monitoring framework as designed and, The process leading to the monitoring framework as designed and implemented has been participatory and has brought together the input of all concerned through the regular dialogue on employment and labour led by the Union for the Mediterranean Secretariat and the European Commission. The process leading to in this slide, you will see the Union for Mediterranean member states that volunteered to be part of the monitoring exercise. And I take the opportunity to remind that the process is open and voluntary, as well as flexible. Indeed, some countries provided information and data only on some of the pillars and for parts of those pillars. So Pillar 1 is on more and better jobs. Overall, the answers for this pillar show a high policy interest for decent jobs creation, something that was now reminded, as well as innovative policy measures and programs that could offer opportunities for peer learning and cooperation. Pillar 2, overall, we observed an increasing awareness of the importance of social dialogue and the role of civil society organizations in the governance of the labour market, including to improve its outcomes. The monitoring results show the establishment of legal frameworks and mechanisms for partnership and dialogue, for promoting economic reactivation or recovery, and for job creation. However, the implementation and effectiveness of these mechanisms should deserve further analysis to show implementation progress and clear results. So we cannot yet talk about impact, but we can talk about the conditions to achieve this impact. Pillar 3, on more inclusive labour market, results of the exercise showed that there is a variety of policies and measures for inclusion of youth, women and migrants in the labour market. And again, however, the level of implementation and effectiveness of these policies should need more precise and regular monitoring and evaluation to be accurately measured. Finally, the Pillar 4 on skills for a changing world of work. It's recognized everywhere the importance of vocational education and training and its importance for employability. And activation is high in the policy agendas and actions, but the skills anticipation remains one of the weakest points to ensure better matching with labour market needs. And among different things, availability and accessibility to data, partnerships and with private sector, etc., are among some of the reasons for this situation. So there is still a lot of room for improvement for this area of skills anticipation. Then some of the recommendations for action. The first one would be this enable environment for job creation, formalization of jobs and decent work for all, including fair wages, decent working times, social protection, occupational safety and health at work, as key elements for sustainable and inclusive growth. Fiscal incentives for further development of social economic sector, organization of informal economy, protection of its workforce, and skills development programs for all as a tool to raise productivity and to support transition to formal economy. Skilling youth and and adults to be more entrepreneurial. We were talking now, reinforcing startups, hubs, incubators, business incentives, startups grants to boost job creation. And provision of good quality childcare services, appropriate protection against harassment in the workplace, and reduction of gender inequality in the workplace. Second recommendation, fostering sound social dialogue and partnerships with the private sector and civil society that foster entrepreneurship, reinforce SMEs growth, and promote cooperatives and social economy enterprises. Developing the capacities and procedures for effective participation of social partners in policy making, social consultation, and collective bargaining mechanisms. And reinforcing public-private partnerships and synergies to foster a multi-level and multi-stakeholders labour market governance ecosystem at national, sectoral, and local levels. Improving services to outreach the people who are not in education, employment, and training, making use of instruments such as the good practice in the EU, which is the Youth Guarantee Program, which now is starting to be also tested and implemented in the region. Two, enhancing youth employability and bringing innovation and digitalization for economic growth, decent work, and social inclusion. Empowering women economically and socially, enabling the conditions for them being active drivers for the economic recovery from the COVID-19 crisis in an equal basis, together with other vulnerable groups such as migrants, ethnic deprived groups, or persons with disabilities. Strengthening public employment services and targeted active labour market policies with a focus on upskilling pathways. Training policies seem to have some of the greatest long-term impacts and prove to be the most effective of the active labour market measures at increasing employment in low and middle-income countries, especially when combined with counselling. Participation in training has not only a positive effect on the probability of finding a job, but can also support labour market transitions of adult workers by increasing their adaptability to a changing environment and making better career decisions. Employment measures work best when they are targeted while remaining prone to vulnerable population and associated to upskilling pathways. Reinforcing public and private partnerships for skills anticipation and development to boost employability and better address the challenges of green transition, technological change, and digitalization of the economy in the region, as well to address the prominent and persistent issue of skills gap and mismatches in the region. Embedding the culture of monitoring and evaluation of policies in general and those related to labour market outcomes in particular. This calls for robust and transparent data collection, analysis, and dissemination that allow designing and reviewing labour market and social policies on an evidence-based approach. And then strengthening bilateral and regional peer learning and cooperation through community of practices and other platforms of exchanges. This cooperation may also prompt the so needed regional integration that is, as I said, an objective of the organization. My last slide is on lessons learned on the process of this pilot monitoring exercise. First of all, there's been a very good dynamic among volunteering countries, no matter if between countries of the so-called South-South or North-South participating countries. Relevant contribution for the improvement of data collection tool, despite the availability and accessibility of some of the data remains an issue. But in general, this is also a lesson learned. Interinstitutional cooperation at national level remains an issue. This has resulted in some cases in longer processes of collection and validation of the information across all pillars. This is a little bit everywhere, but still it remains an issue in many countries between Ministries of Labour, Ministries of Education, Training, and so on. This always is a problem to have access of data on a more normalized way. While there is a variety of legal framework and policy measures and action plans, the level of implementation and effectiveness of these policies would deserve further analysis. That's what I was saying before, that sometimes the impact of these developments takes some time to be really evident. The exercise should be work in progress, so we consider work in progress, and a continued effort in order to capture information that can be quickly outdated. It would be important to think on a continuation and regular exercise. This work and its results, particularly the good practice, will provide valuable information to feed and exchange in the U4M community of practice of youth employment and reinforce knowledge sharing in the areas of interest of the U4M member states. This experience that I've been presented was a pilot phase, and I hope that the ministers tomorrow will review and renew their commitment to keep monitoring as a priority, and if that is the case, that even more U4M member states will join the group. I just would like to invite you to visit the stand that is beside the coffee break, the coffee place, where there is, you can see more detailed information of the platform, where you can access to detailed information of all these different indicators and pillars that I was presenting before. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias. Thank you, Mr. Mateu. Ladies and gentlemen, time for lunch. So we will all go now